Good morning, everyone. A big welcome. My name is Michiel Koolman. I'm the co-chair of Workplace Pride Board, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here. This has been an annual event for many years. I even lost count, but we're very proud that we're doing it again here and that you all came. So first, maybe a word about Workplace Pride. It's an organization, of course, fighting for LGBT workplace inclusion. It's a membership organization. And I'm very happy to say that our membership is very robust. We see some members leave and we see lots of new members come. You might think, well, this is the time of the war on woke, on DEI, and so we see quite lots of mutations in our membership, but actually we do not see that. So I'm very happy that our members are committed, and they're also very active in what they do to support LGBT workplace inclusion. We celebrate this actually tomorrow because it's our Impact Gala at the Beurs van Berlage. And I saw a whole slew of our members lined up for awards. And I don't know exactly who's going to get the awards, but it's a great mix of our membership. So it's commercial companies, it's non-for-profits, and also universities are there, and research organizations. Last year, actually, the universities were very prominent at our gala, and it was especially Erasmus, who got many awards, I don't know, so great, well done. So, and let's see, maybe tomorrow it's another university. Leiden. Yeah, I think so, Leiden, yeah. I see that Delft was also a bit mentioned there, but yeah, exactly. I see that they were certainly nominated for their boat at Amsterdam Pride. So it's a membership organization, but we also have communities. So we have, for instance, Young at Workplace Pride. They just started their mentoring program. So if you're interested, you should definitely join as a mentor or mentee. There is Women at Workplace Pride. There's people of color at Workplace Pride. They actually are doing some research. I think I see a researcher in the back from Erasmus University, which is also great. And of course, there's academia at Workplace Pride, and I'm kind of coordinating that. We have lots of members there. There it's also pretty stable, the membership. Of course, for universities, I'm double worried, because not only is there a war on DEI, but there's also, of course, the budget issue. Of course, we're all very hopeful. There are elections. We hope it will change in the coming years. But at this time, it's certainly a financial crisis at the universities. But so far, so good. Many universities are committed to, of course, diversity and inclusion and also their Workplace Pride membership. So the themes that we discussed in Academia at Workplace Pride was first the benchmark. So any member at Workplace Pride can participate in a benchmark, and it's a very powerful way to see how are you doing, what is going well, what is not going well, and how can you change it over time. And I would really encourage every member to kind of embrace this. It's an investment, but it's worth it. We also talked, of course, the impact of politics at universities on the LGBT workplace inclusion. And finally, we had quite some interesting, I call them HR, but they're certainly important. For instance, transition leave, parental leave, etc., etc. This year, and of course, again, I can give the floor to Jojanneke van der Toorn. Of course, she doesn't need an introduction, but I should actually emphasize that Workplace Pride is kind of unique. There are not that many organizations that have a chair, and so just like, in the world of climate change, you want science-based policies. We're also very happy that at Workplace Pride we have science-based advice from Jojanneke. And so together we've been working for 10 years now, I think, more or less. Almost. Great successes over time. Seen in research and publications, also in joint opinion pieces. So we're very happy about that partnership, and I hope we can continue many more years. And I'm actually proud that I can give the floor to Jojanneke to kick off this symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Michiel, and thank you, Workplace Pride, for doing this together. I'm also very happy that you are all here. Just a few notes. We are recording this session. If you do not want to be in the recording, then don't sit in the front row, so move to the back. If you do not want there to be pictures of you, then also let us know. And it's Christine who will be taking a few. Christine, can you raise your hand? Sorry, yes. Let Christine know if you do not want to be in them. Then we will filter them after. Yeah? If you communicate about this, and this is an old slide I see on X or Insta, then please include these tags. This was actually your slide. And this is the program. We have a keynote by Fletcher. I will introduce him shortly. A little bit from myself about research that my PhD student is doing at the moment. And then we have an interactive panel session, followed by coffee and tea. And I hope you will all stick around for that. There will be vegan snacks as well, for those who are already a little bit peckish. So welcome. It's my pleasure to have you. Please do raise your hand after the talks if you have questions, and during the panel session, Shitich will also open the floor for questions from the audience. Please do use respectful and inclusive language, listen to each other. This actually never goes wrong during this symposium, so I'm not so worried, but just letting you know. And another thing is that the gender-inclusive bathrooms are a little bit of a stroll away, as usual. You go across the courtyard. Sorry, I'm pointing in the wrong direction. I think it's that way. And then it's inside over there. Segregated restrooms are near the reception area. So unfortunately, you'll have to walk slightly further for the gender-inclusive restrooms. We're still working on changing this here. Now, my distinct pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker to you, Professor Fletcher, a full professor of psychology and human resource management at the Metropolitan University of Manchester. His work has both influenced academia and practice, as management scholars do. It's really, therefore, also my pleasure to have him here because it's at this intersection between science and practice. He's internationally recognized for his work on LGBTIQ+ inclusion at work, identity management, employee experiences, so work that is very close to my heart. And that is what makes this symposium very fun for me. I get the opportunity to introduce new people to you, but also to get to know people myself. So it's a little bit self-centered that I organized this symposium. And we will be spending the whole day together this afternoon with our PhD students and colleagues to discuss the science more. So that will be an intimate party, but we like to share publicly what he has done in his career so far. And I hope that you will enjoy it, that it will raise lots of questions, and that you will, if you have any inkling to do research, will also want to join our research community. There are always ways to collaborate, even if you are doing research at an organization, even if you are simply in practice working on LGBTQ+ workplace inclusion and want to collaborate on gathering new insights together. So do come up to us later. Yeah, without further ado, Fletcher. This works, but you can also...
Okay, great. So thank you, Jojanneke, and thank you, Leiden University and Workplace Pride for inviting me. I'm just going to move the mic. I'm short. It really is a great honour to be here today, and it's great to see such a great community of scholars, practitioners, people in the ED&I space working on this, and it has really evolved over the last kind of 10 years or so, and it's really a really exciting time to be in this space, although we have some challenges obviously at the moment, but I'm sure we'll get through them. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the challenges and opportunities around certain topic areas, particularly around allyship, authenticity and disclosure at work for the LGBT community, and also kind of focusing in on the T as well, because it's a really important part of the community, which sometimes gets lost out from some of the research and some of the inclusion activities. So Jojanneke has already introduced me, but just to kind of give a quick introduction. So I've recently become a full professor, so this is also a really great experience for me to kind of have my first keynote as a full professor, so thank you for being here. I was previously at the University of Bath as an associate professor for 4 years, and then was at other universities before that. I'm a psychologist by background, that's my training, but I definitely am more involved now in HR and management research. So I'm really at that intersection between kind of applied organisational psychology and kind of HR and management practice. I live in Birmingham in the middle of the UK with my partner Jim, who's here today, and our 2 little dogs, Dexter and Trixie, who are having their own little mini holiday at the moment. So I don't know who has the better option, but I think I do. Anyway. So just to cover a few things, we're going to cover a bit more about general research around LGBTIQ plus inclusion, and then focusing in on specific areas around disclosure and authenticity, and then a bit more around allyship and talking a bit more about some of the insights around allyship, but also some of the challenges and how to navigate through some of those challenges, and then ending with some key takeaway recommendations at the end. So when I was first getting into this kind of field, it was probably about 10 years ago. And when I was kind of exploring the literature and what was being done, there was kind of specific pockets of research being kind of explored, but quite isolated areas. So some kind of focus on the idea of heteronormativity. We've probably all heard of that expression before, and cis heteronormativity, and how we have to kind of fit in and navigate the organisational spaces and environments because of the kind of heteronormativity ideals and norms around how to express sexuality and gender. We also may kind of internalise stigma and internalise kind of shame around that. There's also a literature around kind of management and leadership, and particularly around the fact that we have a lack of visible role models. That's changing now, but there's still a way to go on that area. But also the kind of, there's a lot of psychological research looking more specifically at the prejudice and stereotypes that function through recruitment, for example, and hiring biases, particularly around things around ideals around management and masculinity. There's another kind of set of literature that focus much more broadly on kind of sociological phenomenon like gendered occupations and how certain occupations can be segregated by gender and sexuality and other demographics like race, and some social psychological research looking at stereotypes and how they activate in different organisational settings. And lastly, because I come from more of an HR background, we have kind of an area which is talking about variation and history of legal protections across the world. It's mainly US focused because they have state level versus federal level differences, and so they explore that a lot, but there's obviously a long history and variation across the world around things like marriage and workplace discrimination policies. There's also a kind of criticism around the idea of pride events and how they can be perhaps quite tokenistic for organisations. So again, there's kind of some criticisms around, even though there's some really positive benefits for involving in things like pride events, whether the organisation is actually doing something substantive behind the scenes to kind of back all that up. There's some criticisms in the literature that some organisations choose to kind of do these tokenistic gestures, but perhaps don't do a lot of work behind the scenes to kind of support all of those activities. And lastly, there's an area of research that focuses on HR practitioners and policymakers in organisations and how they might lack the knowledge and skills to deal with really specific issues around LGBT inclusion. Things around gender transition, for example, is not very well understood by HR practitioners. HR professional bodies often don't particularly get that involved in those kind of discussions. So again, it's kind of exploring how can organisations put together proper knowledge and training and guidance for HR managers. But when the title of my presentation was really about LGB with the T, quite often a lot of things get lumped together under the LGBTQI plus umbrella, or whatever acronym you choose to use. But there's a really specific need now to kind of really focus on trans and non-binary and other gender diverse experiences. And the literature kind of paints quite a bleak picture in this regard. So they're more like some research I did a few years ago suggests that trans and non-binary people in particular face much more increased prevalence of negative workplace conflict. So that can be more minor things like kind of feeling undermined at work by other people, to more significant things around workplace harassment and verbal abuse and physical abuse at work. Then there's a literature mainly from the US that focuses on the labour market discrimination, so things like access to even access into jobs and particular organisations, and also hiring discrimination is a big thing as well. And that can be compounded by other particular characteristics like social class and race and disability. And then I think the last 2 points go together. I think we've seen that there's a really significant rise in anti-woke and anti-gender narratives and lobby groups and so on. And I think that goes hand in hand with a rise in hate crime and broader societal conflict around LGBT inclusion, particularly around trans and non-binary identities. I've also done a bit of work on non-binary workers as well, and how that's particularly misunderstood, I think, in organisations, and that there's a real big diversity within gender diversity that isn't necessarily fully explored or really understood in the literature or by practitioners. Going back to kind of the fundamentals then about the research area, when I came into this literature, the main dominant focus was on the idea of disclosure and identity management. So this is about the everyday decisions that you have to make as an LGBT person, about to what extent are you going to reveal certain information about yourself that gives an indication for your gender identity or sexual orientation. And we call that kind of invisible characteristics or invisible stigma. And so the literature generally tends to paint the picture that concealing your identity at work and withdrawing from those discussions about your wider life, or even faking aspects about your identity. So, for example, changing the gender of your spouse or partner to kind of fit into the norm, that can be quite detrimental to your well-being. In contrast, more disclosure and being more open about yourself and feeling more comfortable to disclose information is more positive. So there's generally, positives and negatives, but there's an emerging literature that talks about disclosure being qualitatively different for whether you're talking more about gender and gender identity versus more around sexuality and relationships. So, for example, the concept of passing is considered slightly different between whether you're talking about trying to pass as in terms of gender or whether you're trying to pass as a heterosexual. So again, there's various notions in that as well. But I was always a little bit uncomfortable with the notion of disclosure. I think there's a lot of pressure on individuals to kind of come out, and that's not always the right thing at the right time for people. And I thought actually there's some deeper psychological things that we need to kind of pick apart here when we're just talking about disclosure. So I went to kind of the literature on authenticity. I think that resonated with me as an LGBT person more than perhaps just disclosure on its own. So for me, I went to kind of looking at what makes authenticity kind of a concept. So there's three main dimensions here. One is about authentic living. So this is more around when you're at work, kind of feeling that you're living by your values and your beliefs, and kind of expressing yourself in ways that feel kind of connected to who you are outside of work. Self-alienation is kind of the flip side, so kind of inauthenticity aspect. So this is more about trying to navigate the role that you're having to play at work. So we all come to work having to perform a particular job, a particular role, and it's kind of putting on a mask when you come to work. But a lack of self-alienation is where you can still feel that real deep authentic connection with who you are outside of work. So it's kind of, you can still have those natural expressions of who you are in the workplace. And external influence, again, is another kind of negative aspect, and that kind of goes back to the idea of heteronormativity. So feeling that you have to fit in, you have to mold yourself to the environment And again, it's about kind of a lack of that external influence. So feeling that even though the environment might be pushing you in certain directions, you feel that you can still kind of express who you really are in the workplace. So again, I look at those kind of three things as kind of interconnected as a whole. So a quick research example around disclosure and authenticity. This is a piece of research I did with Ben Everly at the University of Sussex a few years ago, where we did a kind of two-way survey with LGBT workers in the UK. And we were interested in kind of exploring what's the link between the organisational infrastructure, if you like, the policies and practices that people are perceiving around LGBT inclusion. So do they perceive that their organisation supports anti-discrimination policies, kind of have really good diversity and inclusion training that includes things like aspects around sexuality and gender identity, whether there's good line management guidance around supporting LGBT workers, and so on. And we were interested in the link between that and kind of general well-being and life satisfaction. So to what extent do these policies actually make a difference to making people feel generally good about themselves in their lives? And we felt that disclosure was one good connection, but authenticity was perhaps another more powerful mechanism. And we did find that the more an LGBT worker felt that their organisation put in place these good policies and practices, the more likely they were to be more open to more people at work about their identity and felt more authentic about themselves. And that in turn led to them feeling more kind of generally satisfied with their lives. And it was particularly this authenticity link that was the more powerful in that kind of story. I've also done some recent work looking extending the idea of authenticity to authentic leadership, so looking at how LGBT managers and leaders express authenticity in a leadership role, because that kind of adds another layer of kind of responsibilities and expectations. And again, there's kind of opportunities and challenges there and how people kind of operate. But again, it's about having that supportive infrastructure, having supportive organisational policies and practices. But when we get back into it, it's more about the relationships that people have every day. So the relationships with their co-workers and their managers, that's particularly important. So that's why we go on to kind of talking about allyship. Allyship has become quite a zeitgeist in a lot of the literature, but also in practice. Research is always a bit slower to catch up with practice. So this it kind of started in the 90s in the literature, but then kind of died, and now it's kind of regenerated again, I think, with the kind of organisational focus on allyship. And initially, a lot of the early literature focused on allyship as who that person was, so who was the ally and what status did they have. So it tended to be focused on a dominant or majority group member who was motivated to kind of end oppression of other minoritized groups. So in a sense, it positions it only of a group of people who are motivated by a particular set of ideals. And so it's very much about the ally themselves rather than the group that they're actually trying to support. More recently, though, it's changed away from that because I think there's some criticisms around the pure focus on who the ally is. So it's more focused now on kind of behaviours and attitudes that allies are actually doing and how are they actually interacting with people. And more later definitions are focusing on the idea of more activism, proactive behaviours, and kind of focusing more on those elements. So going into that, there's kind of three main themes, if you like, around allyship behaviours. So one is about really exploring and understanding the issues and challenges for LGBT people, for example, and really showing that knowledge and awareness when you're talking to people. So it might be listening to podcasts, reading blogs, engaging in films and literature, not just about communicating with LGBT people themselves, but really understanding the broader lived experience. And then the second part is more about communication and confrontation. So part of it is about helping other people understand and educating others and being supportive in that. And then the other thing is around confronting misinformation and disinformation, and also confronting instances of prejudice and discrimination. There's also a kind of emerging kind of literature around the idea of calling in rather than calling out. So this is the idea that Some people might just be naturally feeling a bit uncomfortable, don't know where to go, they're not sure what the best way to approach this is, or they might have some concerns, or they might be getting into the kind of disinformation, misinformation space and being persuaded by that. So the idea here is, instead of saying, no, you're transphobic, for example, is to say, actually, we invite you to talk about what are your concerns, what are the issues here, and support them in trying to understand what the real challenges and real issues are. So the kind of emerging literature around that as well. And then lastly, there's an area around action and advocacy, so really going beyond just kind of communication and helping other people to understand, but to kind of be more a partner with the LGBT community, really get involved in different community groups, activities, campaigns, and kind of be more focused on action rather than just relationship building. Oh, okay, great, thank you. So, just to give you a quick research summary on a piece of research I did on allyship. So this was a few years ago with my colleague Rosa Marvel at the University of Portsmouth in the UK, and we conducted 2 interrelated studies that we put together in a paper, and we were interested in how can we develop a sense of allyship for trans workers from cisgender heterosexual colleagues, but also how what effects might that have for trans and non-binary people themselves. So study 1 was looking at the intentions. So we did an online kind of quasi experiment with a group of heterosexual cisgender workers in the UK, and we provided them with a kind of hypothetical scenario. So we asked them to think about their job and their organisation and their team, and then think, okay, this situation happens where a co-worker wants people to know about their transgender identity and that they intend to transition at work, and they want people in their team to know about that, so that's communicated through their department manager, through an email, and then we just say that there's mixed reactions to that news in the department, so there's no kind of particular view from anybody. And then they were asked to kind of rate different statements about to what extent they would show support and allyship to that person. And then study 2 was looking kind of at trans and non-binary workers and their perceptions of allyship in their own teams and their own organisations, and then the impact on kind of psychological experiences and well-being. And for that one, we controlled for their general sense that they had good relationships with their co-workers, because we wanted to see what the added value was of allyship in particular, because it's fine to say, oh, there's a correlation there, but we wanted to see whether that actually was more powerful than just generally being in a supportive environment. So what we found was, for the first study, for those that were cisgender and heterosexual, if they were working in organisations where they felt there was a really strong diversity and inclusion climate, they were more likely to kind of at least intend to support that transgender worker. And we also found that was the case for those that ordinarily wouldn't be that supportive of trans inclusion or of ED&I. So these are people that tend to view society in very structured, hierarchical ways, and that we shouldn't really supporting equality or people trying to get kind of equal status. So we found that even for that group, they moved kind of somewhere towards supporting the idea of allyship for that community, mainly because there were the norms around that organisation was very strong around diversity and inclusion. And then for trans workers themselves, we found that perceptions of allyship really matter for their sense of psychological safety, so in terms of feeling able to express their opinions and views. And we also found that was that they felt more authentic at work as well. And then in turn, those kind of psychological experiences connected with their motivation and engagement at work, as well as their broader well-being. But so in general sense, allyship has become kind of, yes, it can be positive, there's really good things about it, but there's also an emerging literature that's really challenging the idea of allyship, and actually there's some really specific issues that we need to attend to when we're both researching it, but also in practice. So on one hand, it can be seen as tokenistic in the sense that organisations are kind of saying that they're doing allyship and they're putting together training, for example, but actually they're not following that through with really recognizing and valuing those behaviors or monitoring those behaviors in the organization, or putting an infrastructure together that support allyship. So, and again, it might just be virtual signaling. It can be performative in the sense that someone who's gone through allyship training or saying that an ally, it could be more about developing their own sense of kind of self-esteem and kind of meaning of work in terms of, yes, I'm supportive, aren't I great? So again, it can be focused much more on the ally rather than the actual kind of benefits for LGBT people. And also it can be ineffective in the sense that it might be assuming certain things around the community or for individuals in the group, in the team or the department, but actually no one's asked them. So it might not be the right things for them at the right time, or there might be some backlashes towards that as well. And the general thing is that it needs to be supported and reinforced institutionally, both at governmental level, at kind of sector level, and at organisational level. So it isn't just stopping at the kind of organisational level, it needs to be supported by other mechanisms across society. The other thing is that I've seen, for example, Microsoft have this kind of mantra around allyship for all. They're really trying to embrace this idea that allyship is for everybody, everyone can be an ally to everybody else. But I think what we're seeing at the moment with the rise of this zero-sum thinking around rights, so for example, pitting women's rights against trans rights or LGBT rights against freedom of speech and freedom of religious expression. I think when organisations are thinking about the concept of allyship for all, that everyone can be an ally, there are some tension points between certain rights, and this is reflected in the UK, where there's a lot of attacks, for example, on the Equality Act, where they're kind of pitting different groups together. So I think we need to just be very mindful about that and being very considered about if organisations are kind of wanting to go in that direction. Allyship could also be a kind of moral superiority complex in the sense that individuals and organisations go, aren't we great, we're great allies. But we've seen this with unconscious bias training, for example. There's a backlash there that people tend to kind of say, I'm done now, I've done the training, I don't have any biases, I'm fine. But actually they're not critically reflecting on their behaviour and how they can improve. And lastly, I think there's a tension point or balancing point between kind of putting parameters and a boundary over allyship, because the organisation wants to put in place proper policies and practices, have really clear guidance for how allyship should be incorporated in the organisation. But there's some argument that could dilute the impact, because some allyship researchers would say it needs to go in the direction of more radical change and more radical activity and activism. And organisations don't really like to necessarily go into that space because it puts them into a bit of a conflict zone around political kind of agendas. So again, there's a kind of balancing act between kind of doing allyship that really pushes the boundaries, but not doing it in a way that perhaps alienates organisational managers and leaders. So just to wrap up then, I think I'm well over time, but anyway. So some key takeaway recommendations. I think it's really clear from the literature that organisations need to really think about how they're going to create that broader supportive climate, and how they're going to do that in relationship to specific policies and practices, specific training that they're going to develop. Because climate is a broader kind of perceptual thing. It's not necessarily obvious. So it's about kind of monitoring and understanding what those climates are across different teams and departments, but also what are the kind of overarching infrastructure connection points. The other thing is really supporting LGBTIQ plus people to be themselves, but really be mindful about visibility of identities. Some people really don't want to be that visible in organisations for various reasons. Some might not even be outside of work. So again, there's challenges there around visibility and disclosure, but really focusing on the idea of authenticity as a kind of foundation. We really need to involve and listen to those who lack voice and representation, even in ERGs and network groups. There seems to be a focus on gay and lesbian, particularly white gay and lesbian voices, and perhaps there's this kind of niche within a niche kind of argument that actually some voices and more minoritized minority groups tend to get, or individuals tend to get kind of missed out sometimes. So again, really understanding where those gaps are. I think there is a space really for allyship and allyship interventions and initiatives, but really understand the context that you're working in here and seek expert advice where needed on that. I think there's kind of problems with it if it's not done very well that can easily backfire. So again, think about it really carefully and plan it and design it in consultation with lots of subject matter experts and people with lived experience. And lastly, we can kind of influence psychological safety and authenticity more directly through really enforcing anti-discrimination policies and really going beyond the law in that respect. I think some organisations clamp down, for example, when there's heightened political tensions and go towards what's legally compliant, but I would argue that that isn't necessarily the best safety net. It needs to go a little bit beyond the legal compliance argument. And we also need to kind of do an audit of HR policies and practices across put different hats on, if it were, about how does it feel to be from different minoritized groups and identities. And lastly, we need to really encourage LGBTIQ+ role models in organisations at all different levels of the hierarchy, not just at senior management, but across different levels, but also be mindful that there's emotional labour attached to placing burden on people to kind of showcase their stories and voices in organisations. So I'll leave that there. So thank you for listening. You can find me on LinkedIn, and watch out, I'm doing an edited book with my colleague Sean Pitchler at California State University that's coming out next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We do have time for questions, so if you have one for Luc, please raise your hand. Yeah.
Thank you. So mine is more than a question, is a comment that hides a question. A few months ago, I holded a presentation at work about the story of Pride and how it all started, trying to explain that the rights that we have today were not achieved by white, cisgender, body-able gay men, but started from black transgender people as Marsha P. Johnson. And somehow I feel that today we forget about it. Like there was I believe that there was some type of cultural appropriation of pride. We can see it sometimes, we also call it gay pride. And even in the way pride is advertised sometimes, you'll see like pictures of body-able white men celebrating. And to me, that doesn't feel like inclusion somehow, feel more like white body-able gay cisgender men are celebrating their advantages more than being more like an inclusive event. And I do believe that these kind of might lead to some misconceptions from outside of the community. So my question, it would be, do you believe that, because sometimes we're so asked for inclusion from the majority, but sometimes we forgot to allyship for ourselves. Sometimes I like the title of this presentation because it's LGB with the T. Sometimes I believe that especially gay men are a bit like the G without the L, without the B, and without the T. Do you believe that this way of cultural appropriation has also some root cause of the maybe somehow like internalized homotransphobia or the need to fit in the heteronormative society? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's a good point about how we kind of pit each other, we kind of are pitted against each other. And I think some of it is easy to blame parts of our community, but we have to also think that there's a lot of other societal things that are kind of forcing us in that direction. So I think we would need to kind of, at the moment, really come together and really understand that we are a diverse community with lots of different perspectives. Some people are more in the more activism camp. Some people don't like that aspect, but I think it's just being aware that we are a diverse community and we're growing in confidence and visibility, and it's fine to be diverse and lots of people having different perspectives. And the history has been perhaps moved away from the origins and the roots and the kind of diversity in the community to kind of being focused on predominantly gay white experiences. But I'd probably say we need to kind of perhaps just trying our best to come together and support each other and really focus on who are the most vulnerable people at the moment that we need to really come together to support, because we have, you know, gay and lesbian people in particular had it in the 1980s, 1990s. The time now is trans and non-binary and gender diversity, and I think now's the time that we need to perhaps set aside some of the criticisms to basically say, no, we now need to come together, say that we're a diverse community. Not everyone's going to agree on next steps, but we really need to now support, for example, the trans community. Because they're targeting LGBT people in terms of saying, oh, it's lesbian and gays don't really think it's, you know, trans people are getting in the way of LGB. And I think we need to say, no, it's not about that at all.
Thanks.
Can you give the mic?
So thank you very much for your talk. I was wondering if you have any advice on how to approach those, I'm going to call them perceived conflicts between various minorities, because one of the things that I'm running into is this feeling of, but I don't think the conflicts are quite as contradictory as they are painted to be.
Yes.
But I don't know how to convey that to people who are using those arguments to split minorities apart.
Yeah, I think perception is right. There's some of it's manufactured for sure. So I think sometimes you can't persuade people that are already there. You know, they've already gone in that direction. You know, you're not going to sway them. I've had to deal with very strong gender critical perspectives in some of my work. And there's just no argument against them, because they're just going to keep coming back with their own arguments, and they're not willing to listen. So my focus is, how are we going to persuade the middle ground that are perhaps apathetic or don't just think of it as a niche area, it doesn't really matter so much. How are we going to persuade them that it really does matter, because it's going to matter for lots of other people's rights, not just trans and non-binary people, but it's going to affect broadly women and women's rights. I think if you see where the direction's going, it's very much in that direction. So I think it's trying to persuade that middle ground that isn't quite, you know, they're getting persuaded in that direction, but they're apathetic, or they don't really understand it, rather than the people already there, because you're not going to persuade them.
All right, thank you.
Last question.
Thank you for the presentation. In your key takeaways, you mentioned that gender diverse workers might not always want to disclose the status, but the next bullet talks about the importance of engaging and involving them. So based on your research, what would you advise as the best way to involve and engage them? This could be employee resource groups, managers, or maybe a survey. Just was curious, what would you advise?
Yeah, I think it depends on the context and the organisation and what mechanisms are already there. So I think one is around making sure that people are anonymised. So they've got anonymised ways that they can talk about their experiences, and maybe having a confidential service, maybe in HR, where people can talk to if they're not sure. So, for example, someone who's maybe perhaps thinking about transitioning at work and are unsure and not sure where to go, they might not want to talk about it to their line manager, because as soon as you talk to your line manager, it opens up kind of, you know, routes to other things. So it might be that they just want a kind of safe space just to talk through some stuff without anything happening afterwards. So it might just be providing those anonymous ways. So maybe it might be through surveys to get a broader understanding, or specific people, either in the ERG or in the HR field, someone that's independent and confidential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're already noticing that this symposium is too short. It always is, and we do it on purpose to make you come back next year. And I do hope that you will stick around afterwards so we can simply talk more as well. I know that there are more questions. I'm going to share a little bit about the work of my PhD student, Jon Bokern. We referenced it already, times are tough. They've actually always been tough, I think, but it feels at least that they are even tougher now. Diversity programs are under attack. Some organizations are scaling back. Many aren't, however, so we also actually see a lot of positive. I like to focus on the positive for a little bit, and the nuance, I think, is also really important here. I think this backlash that we're seeing is not just a threat to DEI policy, but also really a reminder that we need to move towards better policy, better integration in the organization beyond symbolic and compliance-based efforts. And we see this happening, as here in these newspaper titles. But we also see it so we need to work towards these more integrated policies, and for this, they should be integrated, systematic, and evidence-based. But of course, that's not the only thing, but it is what we focus on with the Netherlands Inclusivity Monitor. We are monitoring what organizations do, reporting on this, and seeing what still can be improved. And this is actually already quite a challenge for organizations. But our research also shows that there's more to do, right? It's not just about having good, well-designed policy, it's also really about how does this land in the workplace. In our own data, we already see that even organizations that have good policies, so to speak, don't necessarily have an inclusive climate. So much is happening between policy and practice. We do a lot of outreach. We also organize masterclasses at Utrecht University to engage HR and D&I professionals that want to learn more about what we call our best methods approach. But the recurring thing that is discussed at these masterclasses and also in my interactions with organizations is the energy leak due to resistance from employees and managers. It comes back time and again, and so we researched it. If we are to believe the Dutch newspapers, it's even doom and gloom among HR professionals. So I want to highlight this piece in a Dutch newspaper, which is reporting on research where 1/5 of HR professionals participating in this research agreed with very negative statements about D&I policy. Flipping it, however, says that 80% actually did not agree with these statements, which I think is a much better message. Even among the young HR professionals, it was still 70% that did not agree with these statements, and the research did not actually include positive statements, so they could only agree or disagree with negative statements. And I really think that this positive picture also needs to be presented without, of course, negating the experience of the HR and D&I professionals that are really dealing with resistance, or at least they experience it as such. First of all, I think it's important to realize that to truly create an inclusive climate, we need to engage people from all levels of the organization, and they really need to understand what the policy entails, so really the knowledge part, to be willing to contribute to it, so the motivation part, and to have the skills and resources to do so, which is the ability part. And together, these three elements really form the foundation of an inclusive workplace, or at least conditions for creating one. So it's really useful to consider what policy support actually looks like in the organization. What are we actually dealing with when we do not ask people simply how they would agree with hypothetical policy at a more abstract level, detached from their own organization, but what they think of the D&I policy that their organization engages in. And this is what we did in Jon's project, where we looked both of the attitude of people towards policy, so how they think, whether they think it is useful, good, credible, and their behavior, so to what extent they actually engage or do the policy and express this to others. So we have attitude and behavior. And we looked at this in 27 organizations among nearly or over 13,000 employees. And in doing so, by looking at attitude and behavior, we developed a taxonomy, so crossing them basically to look at these 5 different groups of people. So we have champions. They are both positive in their attitude and they are positive in their behavior. These are usually also the D&I professionals themselves. We have opponents, those who are not positive and also do not act. They are on the lower left. We have those in the middle who are kind of neutral, or at least are not sure. But then we also have those who are reluctant. So they're actually not positive in their attitude, but they do act, which is very interesting. And also the bystanders. Those are the people that are positive in their attitude, but not necessarily in their behavior. So the question is, what barriers do they encounter there? Oh, here's a summary of it. These slides will also all be available afterwards, so you can take your time reading up on it. Now, what do we actually see among those 27 organizations that we surveyed? We see that the group of champions makes up about 1/5 of employees in these organizations, so a sizable group. The opponents are actually quite a small group. Only 13% says themselves that they are not positive in terms of attitude and behavior. Then we have a group of bystanders, 18%, and a small group of reluctants, but a very large group of ambivalence, right? So these are the people in the middle who really need to be engaged because they have a risk of moving towards the bottom left and the opportunity to move to the top right. We also looked with qualitative research in one of these organizations, what is behind these survey responses, right? Why do people say this? And initially, we actually thought that the reluctants would be people who did this because it's in their job description. So they don't agree, but they will do it because simply it's their task to do. But that was not the case. Actually, these people were very much in favor of the goal, the ultimate goal of diversity and inclusion, but just did not agree with the way the organization is going about it. And funnily enough, or interestingly, lots of managers are in this group, just like in the group of champions. So the ones who are big on the behavior are actually on the right side of this taxonomy. The opponents are those who indeed are not agreeing, and this has nothing to do, or very little to do, with the policy itself. They simply don't endorse the vision of diversity and inclusion, right? And so I can't go into a lot of detail, but this raises a lot of interesting starting points for how to deal with resistance. So that's the next question, and I will very shortly say something about it. And I like to introduce this very old work, actually, by Irene Wasserman and colleagues on dancing with resistance, which may actually be a little bit related to the work that you presented on calling in. I'm going to look at that literature now. There may be some resemblance there, which is really about resistance being a source of information rather than something to mitigate, right? So it's about using it where you can. Of course, you want to try to get people to endorse the D&I policy, but also choosing your battles and focusing on those motivations. So by understanding resistance, you can get further, is the idea. So it can provide a lot of interesting information to know more about where resistance is coming from on intent. Is it about intent? Is it about the approach? Is it about how policy is implemented? And by viewing them as sources of information, you can sort of hone in on, is it about a lack of knowledge, or is it about a lack of motivation or a lack of ability? We see very much focus, also in organizations, on addressing a lack of motivation, trying to convince people that it's the right thing to do, for example, whereas actually in our data we see that it's very often the case that people don't know what the policy is. So it's really about that lack of information, a lack of knowledge, which may be much easier to attend to. At the same time, we also see, especially among the bystanders, that there's a lack of ability. People don't know how they can contribute, right? So maybe internally they agree, but they don't know how to express it to colleagues. They don't know how to do it. They don't have time, which is a resource and a very important one. So ability also may be more fruitful to focus on. We know from psychology that trying to change people's motivation can be very hard. So it's really worth at least knowing what is behind it. So yeah, that's what we see here as well, right? So the ambivalents tend to really often not be aware of what the DEI policy is. And that's why they answer in the middle. Whereas the reluctance, it's very much about, well, I am able to do it, right? But I don't agree with the implementation. These are the people you should really be listening to. They have supportive criticism or constructive criticism about how to change a DNI policy. The opponents are the ones that you might not really be able to do anything with. You can listen to them, it's a good idea, to know what is driving them, but at the same time, there's nothing in your policy that you can do that will make them change their mind, because their opinion is based on forces outside of your organization. Now, a recent handout we created where we're summarizing this research and also going into some practical recommendations for organizations to address each of these types of resistance or inaction, even the champions who are at risk of losing their motivation, because they're the ones that are driving this, but at the same time, they can experience fatigue, and they can also maybe not be as critical, because they're mostly focused on the end goal of diversity and inclusion. So we don't have time for this now. I also wasn't planning on it, but I do invite those of you who are in organizational positions to let us know if you're interested, because we have a free session coming up on the 27th of November. It's a pilot where we're going to work with these motivations, use your own D&I cases, and think about how, what are effective strategies for addressing these. So feel invited, and all of our handouts can also be downloaded from this website. And that was me. So I'll keep it to that. Thank you very much. I won't allow any questions because I want to move on to the panel session. I think that will be much more interesting. So I invite Luc to come up, Lloyd to come up, Fauzia to come up, Shutic to come up, and Giovanni to come to the front. And then I'll give the floor to you, Shutic.
It feels like I'm standing very far apart from all of you and I'm interviewing you, but this should work, I think, because I don't... Oh, there's a standing mic. I'll look into it once I introduce myself and everyone else here. Hello, everyone. I'm Shutic. It's lovely to be here, and so glad all of you are here for the symposium. As Luke talked about in his talk of, oftentimes research is always a bit lagging behind in comparison to what's happening in practice. So I really find this panel session to be quite important and inspiring to learn what's happening in the day-to-day of people who are working with diversity inclusion topics and working with LGBTQ plus inclusion. Something like I was going to say I'm doing a PhD with Jojanneke, but that's no longer true. I finished my PhD with Jojanneke, and I did it on the topic of LGBTQ plus inclusion. It was always most interesting for me to hear from practitioners of, okay, what's really going on? And so I'll start this panel session by giving everyone a chance to introduce themselves, and also while you introduce, maybe reflecting on what we've heard so far, if something resonated with you in the keynotes, and yeah, what you think about that. I'll start with you, Fauzia, and we'll just go down the line, I think.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Fauzia Ouden. I work at NS, the Dutch Railways. I'm responsible for the D&I policy within NS for a few years now. I think it's so nice to hear a real background, a theoretical background about what we do at D&I. It's my experience is mostly based on what I see within the business and interacting with others. But it's also really good to hear that there are many mechanisms underneath that, how people act and react. And particularly the thing that you said, Jojanneke, about most companies or within organizations, we focus on motivation and less on knowledge and ability. And I think at NS we actually focus more on the knowledge and the ability to do things and interact. And less on the motivation, because we already said in our policy that NS is a company where everybody is needed to do the job. We're an inclusive company because we transport all society in the Netherlands. So it's logical to be an organization where society works with us. So that's our thriving, intrinsic motivation to make sure that D&I is very well embedded within our DNA. And we focus much more on what it is, how you can deal with it, how it feels within you to see from different perspectives. And we're actually a year now that we're focusing more on bystanders and allyship, and bystanders also giving courses on how to interact as a bystander. What should you do when you hear or see something that's okay or not okay, and what is your power to actually change a narrative or change a discussion. So that's a few things that I took away from the lecture.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, and very curious to hear more about, you know, the in NS that it works, like, you know, the assumption is that everyone's working towards, and how you, deal with it in practice. And there's a lot of questions, not enough time, but we'll get there. But I'll first give the mic to Loy.
Hi, I'm Loy van Kessel. I'm an assistant professor in gender studies here at Leiden University, and up until September, I was the chair of the Leiden University LGBT+ network. And what I'm taking away, or what resonated with me, is the importance of leadership, and strong leadership, and consistent leadership, right? What I'm noticing here today, for example, is that there's no Leiden University leadership present in the room, which I think is a bit sad, or maybe also frustrating. And what I've noticed at Leiden University is that what Leiden University often does is show allyship in situations that are public-facing. Right? Leiden University, in recent years, has implemented gender-inclusive policies on official communication. We have more and more gender-inclusive restrooms, although they're across the courtyard, right? And those are small implementations that do something, but are not really addressing structural issues at the university. And at the same time, Leiden University is very happy to present those small implementations as something positive, right? Look at us, look at what we're doing for the LGBT+ community. But when you're looking underneath that surface, right, at Leiden University, don't necessarily see leadership that is consistent in their support of the queer community. So at Leiden University, we have several councils where employees and staff get a little say in the policies or the directions of the university. And as of this year, the student councils of the university, but also some faculties, has a student party that is very explicitly and openly against the trans and non-binary community. This is the VSP. One of their slogans was "Don't be gay, stem VSP." And there are only two genders, durf jij het nog te zeggen? And university leadership refuses to take a stance on this, right? University leadership refuses to say, oh, we actually don't allow this kind of language in our official representation, right? And this has given rise to a lot of frustrated feelings amongst staff and employees. And this is, for me, one of those things, or showcases that university leadership does want to implement those public-facing things that are quick hits, which they can show, like, hey, we're doing something. But when it comes to more structural and more fundamental discussions, right? What kind of language do we allow or don't we allow at the university to protect all of our LGBTQIA plus employees and students. That is still lacking in our leadership.
I think you raise a very good point there of what's happening with Leiden University, and also the eternal debate of how much are you, what if it is public dressing and what if it is actually making change for the well-being of the LGBTQ plus individuals within your own organization. And I think we're definitely going to touch on that to see how to really make more sustainable change that's also resistant to backlash and resistant to change, executive turnover and so on. But I'll skip over Luke for this one and go on to Giovanni, if you could introduce yourself.
Yes. So I am Giovanni Valleus. Small difference in the slide. I'm not working for KPMG, but Capgemini. KPMG, also a beautiful company though, but I work there as a learning and development specialist, and I'm also the chair of Outfront, which is our LGBTQIA plus ERG. And a few things that resonated with me during the talks. One of them is the part of tokenism that Luke talked about as well. How can we as an ERG be seen as just, not just a social club, but also where we have rainbow cupcakes and lukewarm hummus, but also basically how are we going to make impact and drive policy within the organization? Because I think a lot of people think within the organization as well, a queer ERG, what are you doing? It's basically just Pride Month, Coming Out Day, perhaps something on Purple Friday, but we really want to be seen as the voice of all of our queer employees within the organization, and we want to drive change. So I think, how are we going to do that? And I'm very surprised by the model, definitely going to check that out. I just downloaded it on my phone as well, because I think there's such a big group of people that we don't reach, or that are basically, we can put our influence on, to see how are we going to involve them, for example, with our ERG. We always say, don't be a bystander, because we do think if you're positive, we can perhaps turn you positive if you're doing something as well. So how can we basically put one person from the left to the right? So there's still plenty of things I've learned today, and definitely going to put into practice with our ERG.
Thank you so very much. I'll now go back to Luke, because you've already introduced yourself, but you know, you're also on this panel, and hearing these reflections, hearing these thoughts, I would love to hear from you of what has been true in your own research, but also in your own experience working as a professor in the UK, and you know, having experience with all these different topics, both at university context and also perhaps with partners that you collaborate with outside university.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the first thing is I really resonate with the issue around university leadership and lack of that. There's a really big issue in the UK because we've had some really high-profile cases, and we have the Office for Students, which is kind of saying that academics have to we need to allow freedom of speech, and is quite open about what that means. So we've had some quite high-profile cases where gender-critical academics have kind of taken their universities to court, and that's caused a massive kind of university leaders are now kind of very resistant to kind of being very clear around trans inclusion, for example, because they're saying, well, we need to allow academic freedom of speech in this area. My argument is this: if you're not an academic researching it, how do you know, if it's just your opinion, then do you have the right to say that it's academic freedom of speech? It's questionable whether some of these people are actually doing you know, impactful research in this area, or just using it as a voice for their own views. So I think universities need to be clear what is academic freedom of speech and what isn't, because it is quite a contested area, and just because you have a strong opinion about something doesn't mean that you should voice that in an academic institution just because you're an academic. So that's kind of my bee in my bonnet really about that. And I think I really resonate with Jojanneke's presentation about the ambivalence and the bystanders, that we need to really do more to engage with those people, because it's easy for us to go to preach to the converted almost, that we already are speaking to people that are supportive of LGBT rights and inclusion, but what about the people that are kind of on the edges, that don't necessarily get that involved in stuff in the organisation? How are we going to persuade them that actually this kind of stuff matters even for them? So that's kind of my feelings of it.
Thank you. I think especially what you've talked so far, especially also from Jojanneke's presentation of this, also this idea of there seems to be the currents of, oh, there's a lot of resistance, and then you look at the numbers and you find out it's a very vocal minority, and it's a smaller group than you expect it to be. It just happens to be incredibly loud. And to also focus a bit on the other side of the people who haven't made up their mind, or people who are supportive of it, and maybe going a bit back to that, I would love to hear from you on how do you incorporate diversity and inclusion and all these topics beyond that it's just something to advertise with? How do you incorporate it into the DNA of your organization? I'd love to hear from you, Fawzia, because I know you mentioned and what NS is doing and how far you've come with that.
Well, I don't know if we came that far, so I'm going to nuance a little bit what I said before. We have a lot to do still. We have ERGs not only on LGBT but also on other kinds of minority groups. But what I see at NS is that we don't turn away from the topic. I have an example. We last had a new vlaggenprotocol at NS, and it included the pride flag. So now on official days we show the pride flag. So we put that on our internal social platform, and it got serious backlash. So and then in that moment I saw how difficult it still is to talk about these things, and I also the leadership thing resonates really good, because we have on the social platform we have our communications department moderating the discussions, and when we see things are getting really ugly, we shut the discussion down with some explanation and everything. But what we saw there is everybody started looking at each other. Who's going to react on that negative backlash? Is it communication? Is it the D&I department? But it's actually a social problem. It's not specific one type of department that has to react. So what I did then is actually use that as an example. A few days later we had a board and directive meeting, and I actually brought that in. And what happened there is everybody, all those board members, the directors that really have an impact, realized that they are the ones that have to do something. They are the ones that have to speak up. It's really small, but seeing that resonate and seeing that eyes open and really vocally, I should have said something, or I have to do something within my department. It's really small, but it's also impactful. So what we do with our D&I group and with our ERG is actually making sure that the focus remains on the discussion, on curving the discussion. Where everything is happening outside, is happening inside. So if you're not fully understanding what's happening inside, you can't deal with it. And leadership is one of the things that we're investing in, because we see leadership is necessary not only in these types of discussion, but in all types of, whether it's well-being or performance. We see also that we have a lot of middle management, and you see in the middle management that they really don't know how to deal with their people. We're an operational organization, so a lot of our middle management actually have a group of 30 train managers or train drivers that they don't see. So how do you talk with people you see once a year? How do you correct them? How do you, and that's actually something we're really busy with, to make sure that leaders have a connection with their employees and things can be discussed, whether it's any topic, that you can address it and you can really be curious about what someone thinks, and on the other hand, also have very clear what the organizational policy is. This is what you can say, this is what you can't say. And there's a really big gray in the middle, and that's where you have to find, from the leadership, you have to talk to your employer, your team, to actually make an example. So we also have we do the boat ride, we do our flags, we do a lot of things, but that doesn't the things that really make the change. It's really those small things on a day-to-day basis, talking about how do you interact with each other. And what we say is talent is important, and talent comes in many different shapes and sizes and everything. So that's the thing that we're actually pushing now in the organization.
I think that's, you mentioned a lot of things that us are doing, and it's indeed a lot of it happens with the conversations with managers, with the leaders, and I think one of the points you brought up, which maybe I'd like the other panelists to touch upon more. And also, I'm happy to pose the question, but if you have something to say, if other panelists have something to say in response, please feel free. This is much more interesting if this is a conversation versus if I'm asking all the questions. But I would, you mentioned how about the ERGs, and I know so many organizations use ERGs as a way to support LGBTQ+ employees, but also sometimes as a way to connect the community and to the leadership, and to bring these conversations more to the forefront. And both Giovanni and Lois, since you've been the head or are leading the ERGs, I would love to hear about your experience with it. What makes for a good ERG, quote unquote, or how do you make the changes from an ERG so it's not just a group where you have your bowl and your hummus and your snacks, but it activates change and activates individuals in the organization. I would love to hear from both of your experiences.
Go ahead. Okay, sure. What I think is the foundational prerequisite for a well-functioning ERG is that it needs to be truly embedded in the organization, and not just as, oh, this is a fun group that can organize bowls and have hummus, right? But that needs to have a seat at the table with leadership. That needs to have a seat at the table to voice their concerns, to think along with policy. And it needs to be structurally embedded in the organization. Here too, I can probably talk about Leiden University as an example of how it doesn't always go that well. So at Leiden University, there are several ERGs. So there's a women's network, an LGBT+ network, a disability platform. But what I've noticed is that the university treats them as a nice to have and not as a must have, right? So all of the work done by people at the ERGs is on voluntary basis. The result is that it's very difficult to maintain these ERGs. Several of these ERGs have all but ceased to exist. And it's become very difficult to find people who want to commit themselves to work with the ERGs or to commit time to the ERGs. And we've had, in all these ERGs, had very wonderful and committed people, but the moment someone steps down, it's become very difficult to find someone else. And this means that these ERGs, like the university, likes to talk about, oh, we have a women's network and we have an LGBT+ network. But in reality, these ERGs only exist in name. The other effect, because the university treats it as voluntary work, is that you do see that people in privileged positions step up to do the ERG work. And these are overwhelmingly white, cis men, right? And so people in precarious working conditions, people of color, people with disabilities already have less capacity to also commit themselves on a voluntary basis to this kind of work. And this is something that I've addressed time and again with the university, but the university somehow finds it very difficult to organize or think about how to incorporate ERGs on a structural level in its organizational structure.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with, especially it's often seen as a nice to have, but not as a must have. I'm very happy that our D&I lead is here sitting in front of us as well. And I'm very happy that we basically function as a support for him as well. So whenever leadership, for example, asks something, he is the one that basically briefs us on this is happening in the board right now and I need your help on this and X, Y, and Z, for example. I think that's a lovely way to work because that's how we know what's happening in leadership, but also can actually make a difference on what's happening within the company at that moment. And what I would like to add is, I think the very first thing you need to know as an ERG is what is your purpose and what are you going to do within the organization. And I think whenever you ask someone who is the chair of an ERG, whenever they need more than 5 seconds to think on why are you the chair of that ERG, it's not clear what your purpose is and you're not going to make a difference. Because if you know where you're headed to, and you have basically a dot on the horizon, you know that's what I'm aiming for. But I think that is lacking for a lot of ERGs. And something that helped us tremendously because I think we've been in this board for 1.5 years now. At the beginning we were struggling as well because we didn't know what our purpose was. But who really helped us is an executive sponsor. So we have someone who is in the board. He is the one who's translating everything we are doing towards management, towards our D&I lead. And he helps us, one, get money, because that's what we need as an ERG, which is often companies love to mention, oh, we have an ERG on LGBTI. However, they don't have any budget, so it's there, but they cannot do anything. So he's the one who voices everything we're doing, make sure that we have the money, make sure that we have the platform to pitch something to management if we want to organize something, and having a strong and basically involved executive sponsor is really going to make the difference, at least for us. So I think that's 2 things that I think every ERG should have.
I can definitely also, from my own research that I did, can agree with you that having an executive sponsor, having a specified budget, all of these things that's how ERGs sustain and work, because if they don't have to ask or create a proposal for every single event they want to do, and they have someone they can talk to on a regular basis about happenings in the organization, and that seems to be quite successful, yet organizations find it difficult to implement. Believe it or not, I had so many questions, and we're already coming to the time where I also want to leave time for audience questions. So the last thing that I'll perhaps say before I give it to the audience is give you an opportunity to, if you have a question or for each other, or a reflection of where research should be going potentially, or your own experiences you would like to share that I did not get a time to touch upon right now, and then I will give the audience some time to ask you questions as well. Perhaps I'll start with you again, Fazia.
Yeah, I have one, but I don't know how much time we have. I actually struggle with the not knowing how the group looks like. We don't know how many people are in the community, what they need, and I started something as a self-identification, and I know there's a lot of different organizations that also actually already implemented that. But when we ask them how big the response is, it's actually really small. At NS, we started the discussion a few times now, and we get a lot of resistance. Not from the board or anything, because they're on board, but with our I don't know what the word in English is. Please help. Medezeggenschap.
Yeah, Works Council.
Thank you, the Works Council, which actually what they said was, and our Workers Council is predominantly male, within the 50s, white, and what they say is, yeah, we really don't want to put people in hokjes. It's a Dutch word, hokjes. We like hokjes. And everybody should be themselves, but which is true. But on the other hand, I really don't have any information to go on. So, do you have any advice how to do this within an organization?
Less than that, this audience questions is well needed.
It's actually a project that I'm doing at the moment about how personal decisions people make about disclosing personal data to their employer. What I mean, we need to write it up, but it's essentially, one is trust. Do they trust you with their data and also being confidential with that data? The other thing is like the perception of why you're doing it in the first place. So the attribution that they're making about why, because you could say, oh, we want to do it because we want to do great things. Forgive me for that. They're saying that they want to do great things with that data, but unless the person is like, well, I don't really believe that. Like, I think you're going to be using it for compliance reasons or just to make yourself look better externally. So what we found is trust. Having a good diversity and inclusion climate is another thing, and them perceiving that you're doing it to improve things and to be committed to the employees rather than for the organisation's gain. But it's a work in progress. We haven't done much with it yet.
To be continued.
I think, yeah, let's go on to the audience questions. I think this is the perfect time for it then.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to add, if your board is on board, I would use them as ambassadors of your self-identification survey. So if they do their own self-identification and then roll it out through their teams and ask the Works Council to become an ambassador as well, to turn the page. Because if you, usually organizations make it voluntary, and then you need a pilot group, but I would start at board level. That would be my advice.
I work at a marine contractor in construction, and there is no DEI policy or whatsoever. Where do you advise we start to get more inclusion in an industry that is dominated by male white men?
Something we are struggling with as well. We are an IT company, and there's very little diversity in there in terms, especially if you look at gender, for example. I think it's a struggle, but I think opening up the conversation is always the first thing, even if people sometimes are reluctant. I think that's something Jojanneke spoke about as well. See who are the ambivalent people and who can you have talks with and who can help you and support you in that. Especially from, for example, a more ERG side of things, but especially policy, I'm just going to look over this way if someone could help out there.
Yeah, I just want to respond. It actually starts with why do you think it's important for your company? And that has to be vocalized. Because if you don't know why you're doing it, you shouldn't be doing it. If it's just whitewashing or whatever, then... So you really have to think as a company, why do you want it? Why is it important?
So thank you for sharing your ideas. I wanted to come back to the question how to move towards more structural change. So we had some examples, representation in boards or positive policy towards gender inclusive language, for example. And I wanted to ask you to share your advice or positive experiences on reaching more structural change. No one?
Yeah, I think what we're very proud of at NS is the transitioning period for transgenders. It's actually, we embedded that in our CAO, our collective labor agreement. So, and that's been there since the late 70s, and it's evolved from there. So those are a few things that you actually arrange for your employees, so they can actually be themselves. Small thing, but just so.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to close it, but we do still have an hour to talk together, so this is really the benefit of joining in person, to all of those who are online. Thank you very much, Jojanneke, for moderating the panel, for being here, and all of you for listening to us, and let's stay in touch. Thank you.